Okay.
Grace and peace to everybody. We are coming live from Columbus, Ohio with Elder Ryan Coates, who is a dynamic preacher, teacher, and just an awesome man of God who is doing a great work for the Lord. He is here to talk about the importance of good leadership. The Lord has been kind to us for us to sit down with great men and women of God discussing this important topic. Somebody might say, why do you keep talking about leadership? Because leadership is important. I remember my grandmother saying that if your head hurts, the whole body will know that your head is hurting. But I'm going to turn it over to Elder Coates. He's going to introduce himself, and then I'm going to give him some time before the interview is over to talk about some of the books that he has written, and then we'll go from there. So God bless you to everybody.
God bless you. So happy to be here on a call to be different. I think that you're doing a wonderful job in the area of ministry, and the work that you are doing is not going unnoticed by God and by men. So I'm just happy to be a part of this change and this difference that you're making.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. So we're going to go over some questions for Elder Coates. He's going to talk about his experience in leadership. I was honored to interview his pastor, the Honorable Bishop Gdiii Reeves, who is a man of God who preaches, teaches, and I think he's more of a teacher than a preacher. Or does he do both?
He does both well.
Good. So our first question to Elder Coates would be, what is your definition of leadership from a spiritual standpoint?
Well, I would definitely begin to say that leadership, we get our concept of being Christians, stems from the Bible. And one of those foundational principles that we see is the model of Christ. And the model that I believe he demonstrated to us was a servant leader. And so if I were to consider what is my definition of a leader, it would be a servant leader. The Bible tells us he who will be first must be last and be servant of them all. And so if we want to be true leadership, we exist not just for our own benefit and our own makeup, but we exist to serve the people. And as we serve the people, God continues to bless us in many ways that we didn't even know was possible. So leadership stems from the idea of Christ being the model. And as he served the disciples and he's led the flock, we do the same as leaders.
So to be in ministry, one must be able to serve. Can you give a definition of a servant when it comes to ministry?
You know, being a servant is something I believe is the bedrock of ministry. The key foundation, if you look at the word minister, is diakonos, and it means being a servant. It means working with your hands, menial task. And so there's many different ways that ministry transforms. There's different types of ministries. But at the bedrock, it means of service to others. It means of service to people. It means working with your hands to ultimately build the kingdom. And so if you want to begin any type of ministry, it begins in your servitude. Before we hear what you preach, we need to hear what you can do with your hands, and that's in helping build the kingdom.
That's good. That's wonderful. So when we look at our next question, how important is leadership when it comes to the growth of a church?
It is extremely, extremely important when it comes to the growth of a church. I want to say a few things. The leader casts a vision. The leader is the one who shares information as he receives divine inspiration from God. And the leader is the one who continues to guide the people in the way that they should go. But the people also have a responsibility. So it is important to the growth of the church because the leader is the one who propagates, who digs deep so that the ministry can grow from a deep foundation. But also, along with that, we cannot dismiss the laity or the people. They also have a responsibility in the growth. Many leaders are good leaders, but sometimes we have flocks that are obstinate. We have flocks that are like goats that buck against the pricks. We have flocks that wants to do their own thing. We see that model in Moses. As Moses continued to lead the people, they were known for complaining even to the point where Moses got in trouble with God because he acted in a way that God knew that he shouldn't, and ended up missing the promised land. And so it's very integral to the growth of a church, but everyone has responsibility. I also want to say, in terms of the growth of a church, growth happens in many different ways. A lot of times we just look at the expanse of a church and the numbers, but there's different degrees of growth. He told us to go out and make disciples.
Right.
And so discipleship means in our learning, it means in our teaching. And so are people growing in muscle? Are the people that we're shepherding, are they growing as well? That is a necessary proponent of growth, because you can have a smaller ministry, quote unquote, by definition numbers, but be just as effective as somebody who has a mega church. As long as you're doing what God has set out for you to do and you're doing it effectively, you can be powerful.
That's good. That's good. One thing that I want to ask you a question is, what if you're leading a group of people, but they're constantly coming against you? What do you do in that regard?
I think that's where you really have to go to God in prayer to discover a strategy that will enable you to really get to the heart of the people. Just as Jesus, and he was talking to the disciples, oftentimes they question his authority in terms of why should we go here? Or even I'm reminded of the story of the woman with the issue of blood, and the disciples were around him, and they really didn't want people around Jesus in that way.
Right.
And so Jesus had to let them know, hey, she's coming at me for something uniquely different, to be healed.
Yes.
But we have to, as leaders, get to the heart and see what's going on. So if you have those individuals that are warring against you, or are obstinate, or trying to not be defiant in a way that you feel like you can't grow or can't develop, that's where we really have to get a strategy from God. You know, we could dismiss them, we could eradicate them, but a lot of times they're going through things that we don't know of.
Right.
That's where they're acting in that way.
Right.
It's just like a child. A child oftentimes will act in a way to get attention.
Mm-hmm.
He or she's really not bad, as we say in quote unquote terms,
Right.
but they're just acting in a way because they need your love.
Right.
They need your attention. And if we're not giving them that attention, they'll act in a way that, if this acting out of school is going to get your attention, let me go ahead and do that.
Right.
And so as leaders, getting a strategy, really getting to the root. Why are they obstinate? Have we missed something? Have we not paid attention? Is there another area that we need to move to operate in that will bring out a level of growth and understanding? Just as Moses did. He's a catalyst of that, because he had to deal with that often. But many times he would go up to the mountain and consult God.
That's right.
And say, and Jesus would give him direction, feed the people.
Yes.
Let them know quail's coming. Let them know man is coming.
Yes.
You can feed them, drinks coming through the rock. Whatever the case may be, he went and got the strategy from God. So that is the foundation.
That's good. That's powerful. So there you have it. Go to God. They're coming against you. Go to God. As my pastor, former pastor, Dr. Lundy, used to say, just got to pray. Just got to pray and wait.
The Bible tells us pray about everything.
Right.
But we dismiss that. We dismiss it. We really need to pray. I'm reminded of Adam. He went to the garden and met God in the cool of the day every day. And that is what we as believers should be doing. Having that time that's set apart, that's sanctified just for God, so that we can meet and get direction and instruction from him. When we plant our feet on the ground, we should hit our knees. And even if you can't hit your knees, if you're driving your car, that's a time to commune with God and not just pray, but really get into the presence of God. Sometimes we use that term ambiguously. We just want to pray. And we know that prayer begins in communication.
Right.
But there's so many different types of prayer. It's warfare, it's training ground.
Right.
It's getting into the presence of God in a way that you get his attention. You get him in a Panim fashion and turn his focus to you so that he can answer your prayer. And so we really, really have to get into the heart where we receive that instruction from him, so that we know what we do and what our heart should desire.
That's good. So when we look at prayer, why do you think prayer is a least attended service in church? But if you say that we're going to fry some fish and chicken, you can't contain the saints.
I think that's true. If you have any type of extracurricular activity, that's when you'll get a lot of your attendance. But we have a twisted image and twisted paradigm of what prayer truly is.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we really knew or really understood what prayer is, the church will be full. If you talk about getting to the presence of God, where miracles can happen, where sick bodies can be healed, where chains can be loosed and broken, you couldn't stop somebody from getting prayer. But oftentimes we get tired of prayer. We get tired of talking to God because we feel like he's not moving. We feel like he's not there. We feel as if he's this distant or aloof person that we cannot connect with. But it's at least attendant because our image of prayer is wrong. And sometimes our emotions sink in where we feel like we're not making a breakthrough. But I'm of that firm adage that says you have to push, pray until something happens. You have to pray until something happens. Just as a woman of importunity, she prayed until she got the answer. She continued to sought the king until that response was different.
Right.
And we as children of God have to continue to keep that prayer going. You know, prayer is the lifeblood.
Right.
It is the spiritual currency of the spirit. It's that currency to get things done. It's what has power on a spiritual plane. Oftentimes, we don't understand that power. We don't understand when I'm praying, I'm talking to God, that he can give me direction and he can answer that in a moment's notice. And so our image is twisted, and we've got to reshape, and that comes with teaching, and that comes with better education.
That's good. So when I think of growing up, they had all-night prayer services. And they had times where they called solemn assemblies. You don't hear that too much anytime, where the saints went without food for days. And then they broke the fast with communion and then fried the fish. And everybody was happy. So what has changed over the last 25, 30 years from you even coming up that you don't see people, praying as much as they did?
Well, I believe a lot of the cultural perspectives of our world system has impacted the way that we do church. I believe social media has also impacted that we do church. A lot of influences that we've allowed to seep into the ark of safety, which is church, have crept in. Where now we have conformed our services, we've conformed the way that we worship God to fit in individual schedules. So we want to have these services that are compact, that fit the needs of people's schedule, because we're so busy that we miss opportunities to get into the presence of God. Those times of, even though I'm younger, I still attended all-night prayers. I still know what that was like when I was 5 and 6. I was a youngest of 5. And my parents were in ministry. My dad was a head deacon and my mother was an evangelist, and worked with all the arts and choirs and different things like that, of the youth choir. And so it was very, very important for us to attend those events. And I didn't understand it, being young. But one of the things that we've gotten away from is seeing those miracles happen. He said, these signs shall follow them that believe. And somewhere along the line, we stopped seeing God move. And from that, I think we started to get a little lackadaisical when it comes to our prayer in those solemn assemblies and those convocations where we met God as a body.
Yeah.
And when you meet God as a body, as one voice, just as the individuals who were building up the temple, or building up to Baal, building a Tower of Babel, building a Tower of Babel, the Lord let us know nothing will be withheld from them. If they got on one accord, they had an assignment, they were focused on building something that will reach heaven. And the Lord had to scatter them, for his purpose and his divine pleasure. And now, as children of God, we've got to get back to some of those things that gets us back into the presence of God, so we can see those miracles happen for ourselves, that personal miracle, that personal walk. Because if you don't have that, you can go to any service you want. You can go to any all-night prayer. But if you don't see that active relationship of God working in your life, it's not going to cause you to want to come forward.
Wow, that's a good point. That's good. Pray always.
Absolutely.
So you being a leader, what are some of the qualities of a good leader?
Well, I say I'm an aspiring leader. I think we all have a leadership position in the church. And so I'm continuing to grow.
Good.
One of those things I would definitely say is humility, discipline, commitment, and a heart to serve. I say discipline because in order to do what God needs you to do, you have to be disciplined to do it.
Yes.
And that's something that we all kind of struggle with,
Right.
or a lot of people struggle with, being disciplined to stay committed to what God has chosen you to do. And I also say commitment, your commitment to Christ and your commitment to your own self. You know, it's one thing to make a commitment to God, but we also need to have to make a commitment to self, that I'm going to do what I set out to do.
Right.
And if God has called us, you know, the Greek term kaleo means you're called to a higher place from a position of royalty. God has called you to do something great. You have to follow up, not just because God calls you, but because you're making a personal commitment to follow what you said you were going to do.
That's true.
So commitment, humility are some very, very important aspects of leadership. I can tell you it's in the voice. I can tell you it's in the posture. I can say all those things. But at the fundamental thing, building a character where God can direct you at any time is going to be an important characteristic for leadership.
That's good. When we look at the word discipline, you don't hear that word being taught or, preached about nowadays. I mean, because one has to be disciplined to fast and to pray and to study before he or she preaches. And a lot of times I find people just preaching just whatever sounds good and messing up the 23rd Psalms and Genesis 1:1. How important is it for a leader or just a child of God to even study their Bible? I mean, you mess up Genesis 1:1 and Psalms 23. I think those are important scriptures to know.
They are. They are. You bring a valid point. We should continue to study always.
Right.
It's not something we should study as ministers just when we're called upon to teach or to preach, but it should be a part of our daily habit.
Right.
Because prayer is an opportunity for us to love on God. It's a time for Him to get into what we're reading, what we're studying, and to have Him speak to us. Some of my most profound moments I've found was in the scriptures as I'm studying the Word of God, where the Holy Ghost unctions certain things to happen, or the Holy Ghost begins to tell me about different things that's going to happen in my life by virtue of me getting into the Word. Because that is the lifeblood for us. The Bible is a covenant for us. It's a key not only to life, but it's a covenant for us to live by, and to realize not just the benefits, but hold us accountable to make sure that we're lining up and being Christians the way that God desires for us to be. So I definitely agree that we have to continue to build and grow the way that we see prayer and being disciplined. And that only comes from making a lifestyle and a mental change.
Wow, that's good. That's good. I love it. So being under Bishop Derek Reeves there at End Time Apostolic Holiness Church, what are some of the qualities that he has taught you about being a good leader?
He's taught quite a bit. But if I were to highlight just a few of the proponents, one of the things that he has etched into our hearts is to be careful in how you live before the people.
Wow.
You have to be careful how you live toward the people, because you are modeling the way. As a leader, you are modeling. The Bible says, follow me as I follow Christ.
Right.
And as we are continues to be led from our leadership, they create a paradigm for us to follow. And so he is really etched into me. Be careful how you live. And that's just not live before the congregation. Be careful how you live before your own family.
Right.
Because that's where ministry starts. I can't act one way inside my home, a different way outside of church.
Right.
They have to line up and be unanimous in terms of how I live my life. So I have to be careful how I live and model the way. Model what I want to see. I have to be that change. And so that's a very important proponent that he's spoken to me about.
That's good. I love it. I know he does talk about a lot about leadership.
He does. He does.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Why doesn't this generation want to submit under leadership?
That's a loaded question. I think there is a myriad of ways that can happen. Sometimes it's poor leadership or it's untrained leadership.
Okay.
Sometimes
I'm gonna stop you right there. This is a live interview for all the viewers. Let's talk about the untrained leaders. How does one become untrained?
Well, I think it's easy to become untrained. It's hard to be trained.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that comes with submitting to leadership. To be trained to sit at a leader's feet, not just to be a hen, but it's to be there to serve and to learn from that leader. And that proverbial expression is really taken to humble yourselves, and so that leader can impart to you as a father, as legacies imparted from father to son. You can receive that impartation, as so many of the church, the biblical fathers did. They lay hands on their father. But if I'm as a son and I'm up here, it's going to be hard for me to submit to my leader. And so untrained comes from not submitting your gifts to the Lord, not submitting your gifts to the leader, and wanting to do your own thing. Really wanting to build a kingdom within the kingdom. And being untrained comes from not studying, not praying, not having a devotion life, and not having the foundational pillars that will make one solid in ministry. So it's easy to be untrained. Just do things the way you want to do them.
Right.
Just go casually about how you read. Go casually about your church attendance. Go casually about your commission that God has put in your life. That's easy. But the true ministry comes from being discipled and doing those things that you don't want to do.
Right. I see.
And that's what makes it difficult, because our humanity, there's a lot of stuff I don't want to do. There's a lot of stuff I don't want to get up and study. Your humanity says I'm tired. But the discipline and having a why gives a greater focus. If you don't have a why to why you want to be trained, it's going to be very easy to keep restarting and keep hitting the reset button because you're not focused. And that's why we have a lot of half or untrained leaders in positions of leadership.
So when it comes to, say there's a young preacher in the church that's just starting off, and they say, go to the pastor or whoever and say that the Lord has called me to preach. I went to my pastor, Dr. Lundy, after a New Year's Eve service. I can't remember the year. And I said, Dr. Lundy, the Lord has called me to preach. And he just smiled at me, tapped me on the shoulder, and said that he realized that the Lord had his hand on me, but there was a lot of stuff that I had to go through in order for me to know that God had truly called me. Didn't know, thought he was going to give me a Bible and say, here's your child's sermon. So how does one submit themselves to leadership, but also be patient while serving? Instead of going and starting a church, you see that a lot, going to another organization, they put you up. How can one be patient while, still submitted to their leader?
I truly feel that in order to be patient, the Bible tells us what patience does. Patience continuously helps us, right? We have to be, it's definitely a virtue that we have to continuously do. But if you have a trust in God, you can be patient.
I see.
If you trust God the way that you believe that he's called you, God can speak to that leader on how to guide and mold you and shape you. And if God desires for you to go elsewhere, God will continuously lead you, where that leader will send you out when it's time.
I see.
A lot of times God does calls us to leadership, but we have a false narrative about what ministry is. We think we're called to ministry, I'm called to preach. Sometimes it's called to serve. There's different seasons of ministry. And when you're in the initial phases, that's an initial time to get your character together, so that when you are presenting before the people, your life matches what you're preaching about.
I hear you.
But if your life isn't matching what you're preaching about, it does no good if you know how to the hum, hack. You know the cadence.
Right.
You know you're an A flat. All that's great.
Yeah.
Those fundamentals are fantastic.
Yeah.
And really, it really, how should I say this? I won't say it hurts my heart, but that happens to us a lot because we really get involved in ministry, and you see many leaders fall. So many great leaders that went before it was their time, and you can see the number of character flaws that is holding them back. And that's what we see a lot of people in ministry today that have great notoriety, but you see some of their flaws that happen, some of the things that they say, some of the things that they do. And now, the way that the digital world is, we can see those almost in real time.
Right.
We can see those in real time. And so you have to really trust God that He knows the way that you should take.
That's right.
So if it takes 5 years, you can still be praying during that time.
Right.
You can still be studying, because when your time of loosing comes, you'll be ready.
Right.
But if you're not patient and you move before your time, you get into an environment that you'll be tempted and oftentimes have to retreat.
I see.
Just like I'm reminded of when the children of Israel went over to fight many of their enemies, and when God told them, I'm not going to be with you, they still decided to go anyway.
Right.
They said, we're going to go. And God said, if you go, I'm not with you.
Right.
And so if we go, He's not with us, what's going to happen? The enemy's going to beat us up. The world is going to take another 1-2 punch to us. And we're going to find ourselves retreating and going back to where you started from. Because you have to have a solid foundation. And if you don't have a solid foundation, you will not be able to stand. And those fundamental principles is what keeps you grounded. And so no matter where you go, how long you have to wait, you'll still be ready when that time comes. Moses was 80 when he began to preach.
Right.
So we have to wait on our time. We don't know when that timing is.
Right.
Just because I'm called at 18 doesn't mean at 19 I'm ready to go. It may be 10 years. But in that 10-year time, I can still be developing.
Right.
I can still be growing.
Right.
So when my time comes, I'll be ready to be employed by the Lord.
Right. But I think at times, because of social media and because there's so many platforms, you know, if I get 5 people on YouTube telling me I can preach,
Yes.
that doesn't necessarily mean that I should go off and start a ministry. So that's important to wait. You know, the very first sermon that I preached at Church of Christ, I remember it like yesterday. I had gum in my mouth the whole sermon. And Pastor Cecily came up to me with a napkin, and she told me to spit my gum out, and she told me to study. I was all over the place. I can confess that story because I was not trained. I had an opportunity on a Sunday night to preach. It was good training ground, but I wasn't equipped at that time. Chewing gum the whole sermon. That's a long sermon. That's a long sermon. I was nervous. I forgot to spit it out.
You forgot to spit it out. And sometimes those things happen.
Yeah.
But as long as you didn't make that same mistake,
No.
again, we learn. We all have those trials. Sometimes we miss the mark. Sometimes we say things that we are not necessarily biblical.
Right.
Some things slip out of our mouth that shouldn't be.
Right.
But as long as we continue to grow and develop, I think that's what's going to make a difference. Just as we riding a bike.
That's good.
The first time you get on the bike, you don't just start off and run it and never fall over.
Right.
That's why they tell us wear helmets.
That's right.
One of the reasons why you're trying, until those training wheels are off and you're prepared, you're going to make some mistakes,
Right.
as we all continuously do.
Right.
But as long as we don't make the same mistake
Right.
and lose the lesson, then that's where the area is going to be.
That's good. That's good. Well, any final thoughts on this subject, the importance of good leadership? Any words of wisdom for our guests?
I would say this in terms of leadership. Leadership is not just a position, but leadership is it's a posture, it's a behavior, it's an action that you have. Leadership is not just what a leader does, it's who a leader is. I can be a leader anywhere.
Right.
I can be a leader on my job.
Right.
I can be a leader in my family. It's not just being a leader as long as I have a mic in my hand or I'm behind the camera.
Right.
Being a leader means I'm a leader when I go to the grocery store, when I communicate with my neighbors, when things happen and I have to show up and be a leader when I don't necessarily want to. That's when being a leader is important. It's easy to walk around with the collar. It's easy to walk around church and with your briefcase, being a leader, but a leader is stepping up in times of adversity. A leader is stepping up when you don't want to step up. Well, when God calls you in the middle of the night and you go have to rescue someone or you go have to help someone out that inconveniences you. That's what being a true leader is. When you are authentic and when you are vulnerable and have a sense to help other people beyond yourself, realizing it's not about you. That's why we do what we do, because it's not about us. Even when Moses went to God, or God came to Moses in the terms of when he was calling him and said, I need you to go to Pharaoh and tell them to let my people go. Moses said, I can't speak. And God positioned Aaron with him, but Moses was the one who still ended up speaking. He ended up going, I believe, because he truly understood that it really wasn't about him at the end of the day. God had chosen for him to do something different. And so being a leader is important, but you can be a leader now. It's not just when you are in church. It's not just when people are looking at you, but by virtue of your altruistic value and being selfless and giving of yourself. That's when the true nature of leadership is going to rise up. I would say read. Take your vitamins. Take your vitamin W. Digest the word as much as you can. Take your vitamin P. Pray. Pray at all times. Pray when you feel like it. Pray when you don't. Pray when things are good. Pray when things are bad. When you got enough money in your pocket and when you don't. Keep praying. Learn those types of prayers, the categories of prayers, and all the things that prayer teaches us. Take that vitamin F. That means fasting. Humble yourself and humble yourself in a way that you can hear God. Sometimes it takes turning over your plate to really hear what God is saying, because it looses you from that distraction. And stay plugged in to a leader. A leader, I believe, has his hand in two directions. It has it up and has it down. So it's always reaching up to hold the hand of the leader before him and the one that's coming after him. You have to continue, as much as you want to be large and in charge, realizing you are a product of who have poured into you. And you can't stop with just you. You've got to continue to reach down and pick up your brother and your sister. So as you're growing and you're feeding from your spiritual leader who God has positioned you in your life, you got to continue to feed someone else that's coming right behind you.
That's wonderful. That's good, because it is important. We have to understand that there is another generation that's coming after us, and we have to be able to reach that generation that may know nothing about church, that may know nothing about preaching an A flat or any of those things. They just need to be taught the Word of God. I'm going to give Elder Coates an opportunity now to talk about a few of the books that he has written.
So a few books, I'll just start off with just a few. This is one of the first books that I wrote. It's called How to Please God. And the reason why I really wrote this book was my journey in learning what pleases God. We often seek God to please us. What can I get from God? What can God do for me? God, how can you heal my body? How can you make me famous? How can you do these things? But I really wanted to know what pleases God. And so in this book, I list of 9 principles that I believe pleases God. Because ultimately, that's the life we want to live. It's a sad commentary for us to live selfish lives. If we want heaven to be our home, if we truly desire to go to heaven, we have to realize that He is the one that we should be pleasing. Not social media, not for the gram. It's Him that we should be pleasing. And so this is a fundamental book that I believe will enhance your walk to determine what really pleases God. You know, in your life, what's different? There's some fundamental scriptural principles that I list here. But one of those things is seeking the Lord for yourself. So what do you want from my life? And so that's this book here called How to Please God. The next book that I wrote is Maxims. And it says Maxims for the Believers. Thoughts to live by, thoughts to think about, and words to live by. And I wrote this book just as a kind of inspirational, motivational book.
Good.
So it's original thoughts that you can live by, something to think about. So more of your daily devotional things that will enhance your perspective or just give you an alternative way of looking at things. Hopefully, my prayer is that it will give you new solutions to old problems.
Good.
So that's what this book is about here. And so it's just those creative thoughts, more like modern day proverbs that will enhance you as you continue to walk with the Lord.
Good.
This last book that I'm excited about it's on the horizon. It's called Strategic Fasting, Systematic Results. I'm a firm believer that this is one of the most undervalued keys and weapons that believers have, is fasting. And I answer some pivotal questions. Does biblical fasting still work? Should we still be doing it? You know, should we really be engaging on a corporate level? We answer some of those high level questions, and then we get to the nitty gritty of how in the book of Isaiah 58, it gives us fundamental principles of what we should be experiencing when we fast. I started off fasting very young in the ministry, and I didn't understand the power of it.
Right.
And so I stopped because I wanted to work out. I wanted to be fit and trim. I
Right.
wanted to be knowledgeable. And I'm like, I'm fasting 2-3 days a week, but I'm not really seeing anything.
Right.
But my focus wasn't there. I didn't have the tools to understand. I knew stop eating, but I didn't know what was my why for fasting.
I see.
And sometimes when you're in repetitious fasting, you're doing it 2-3 days a week, it can lose its energy. It can lose its flavor. And so I lost that. But in prayer, God showed me some fundamental strategies that I believe every time I fast, He answers the way that He desires to answer.
Right.
Not saying that He answers that moment, but He always answers, because God is always speaking.
Right.
If we are listening.
Right.
You know, the scripture tells us it wasn't in the fire that He came. It wasn't in the loud thundering, but it was in the still small voice that sometimes we can hear the Lord. And sometimes that happens when we're fasting and we're open to the Lord. I love fasting. I definitely believe it's a key for believers. It's a key to leadership. They have now intermittent fasting as kind of a global concept that most people have taken on for health reasons. But when you fast in a biblical way, you not only get the health benefits, but you get the spiritual impact as well. So this one is coming out later on this year, and I can't wait to share with you more about it.
Wonderful. And how can our viewers, if they would like, purchase these books?
You can purchase these books. These are available now. How to Please God, Maximum for Believers, right there on Amazon.com. You can look me up, Ryan C. Coates on all the social media platforms. You can find me there. I also have a website, ryanccoates.com as well. And this one, Systematic Fasting, is coming out later this year. So hopefully soon it will be available for pre-order, and got some exciting things around this as well. I will say on the website, if you're looking for a guide to assist you signing up to the website, being a part of our subscription family will allow you to get a guide right now. If you can't wait on the book, you can get a guide that will help navigate your platform to really cause some differences in the way that you're fasting.
Good, wonderful. Please support this great man of God. Your money, your time will not be in vain, because he truly has a heart after God's heart, and he's a good brother. I do want to thank Elder Coates and his wife for
being here.
Taking the time out of their busy schedule to interview with A Call to Be Different. I'm always honored to sit down with great men and women of God, and just honored. So this will conclude our broadcast at this time. Again, tell somebody about A Call to Be Different Ministry. Subscribe to our YouTube page, and just look forward to more content to come. So God bless you, and thank you again, Elder.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Thank you.